Two women, decades on the front line of child protection, a detective, a psychotherapist, and the same message. The conversation that protects children is simpler than you think. Listen in.
Creating space for community and connection in a world of distraction, for perspectives to be shared and heard.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Perspectives from the Informed Perspective. We're Penny and Jenny, and if this is your first time tuning in, we're so glad you're here. This is the podcast where we explore what it means to build thoughtful, grounded communities shaped by our local lives, but enriched by ideas and experiences from around the world. For us, meaningful change starts with listening, really listening, especially to experiences that challenge or expand our own. Today, we're talking about safeguarding. And before we go any further, what do we actually mean by that? Because it gets used a lot, often in professional or institutional contexts, and it can feel like someone else's responsibility, a school's responsibility, a social worker's responsibility, a government's responsibility. Safeguarding, simply put, means protecting people, and in particular children, from harm, abuse, and neglect. The National Health Service UK puts it like this: safeguarding is a collective responsibility. It belongs to all of us. Children and young people face significantly higher risk of harm simply due to their age, but that risk can be further compounded by gender, disability, race, ethnicity, religion, nationality, migration status, or sexual orientation. Recognizing that it's not about labeling, it's about making sure our protection reaches the people who need it most. When it works, it makes a profound difference. It prevents serious harm happening. But when it fails, the consequences are devastating and long-lasting. And in too many cases, that failure is not a single dramatic moment. It's a quiet accumulation of missed signs, unanswered questions, and often adults who didn't feel equipped or empowered to act. In England alone, over 81,000 children are currently looked after by local authorities. According to government statistics, in 2025, nearly 30,000 children were assessed as having been affected by child sexual abuse. These are not abstract numbers, they are children. Safeguarding runs through every system that touch people's lives: healthcare, education, social care, and increasingly the digital world, where online grooming, cyberbullying, and exploitation are the everyday reality of children's lives, and where our systems have not always kept pace. Online safeguarding adds an entirely different layer of complexity, because in the digital world, adults are often not in the room. They cannot see the conversations happening, the relationships forming, the pressure being applied. A child can be groomed, exploited, or bullied in the space between one room and the next, and the adults closest to them may have no idea it's happening. According to the Safe Online Global Report from 2024, in a single year, reports of AI-generated child sexual abuse material rose by over 1,300%. 1 in 17 teenagers has been a direct victim of deepfake nudes. These are not distant risks. They're happening now to children we know. It's not a failure of parenting or teaching. It's a reflection of how quickly the digital landscape has shifted and how slowly our systems and our confidence have caught up. And it's worth saying clearly, safeguarding is not only the responsibility of those with a formal, pastoral, or protective role. It belongs to every adult who comes into contact with children in any capacity. The teacher, yes, but also the bus driver, the school caretaker, the receptionist, the sports coach, the volunteer. Anyone who's regularly around children needs to know what the signs of harm look like and needs to feel both equipped and empowered to act on what they see. Training is not a box to tick. It's how we make sure that no child slips through simply because the adult who noticed something didn't know what to do next. And yet, even when adults do notice something, acting on it's not always straightforward. There's a very human reluctance to flag a concern, a fear of getting it wrong, of overstepping, of causing disruption to a family or a child's life based on what might turn out to be a misreading of the situation. And that hesitation is understandable, but it's also where children potentially might fall through the gaps. The threshold for raising a concern does not need to be certainty. A genuine worry is enough, And every system that works has found ways to make it feel safe for adults to speak up before they're sure, not only after. And it's not only the adults who need to understand this better, young people do too. A child who's being harmed is far more likely to tell a peer than an adult, which means helping young people understand what safeguarding is, what the signs of harm look like, and crucially, what to do when a friend shares something frightening with them. We cannot build a culture of protection that relies entirely on adults noticing. We need young people to feel informed, equipped, and supported to act too, not to carry the burden alone, but to know how to pass it to someone who can help. It's worth drawing one final distinction before we introduce our guests. Safeguarding is proactive, identifying risks early, taking action before harm occurs, and building those systems and relationships that prevent the abuse happening in the first place. Child protection is reactive, responding when harm has already occurred. Both matter, but a system that only responds to crisis will always be overwhelmed. At its core, whatever the country, whatever the challenge, safeguarding comes down to one thing: protecting children from harm and creating safe environments where they can grow and thrive. That is what today's conversation is about. But before Jenny introduces our guests today, here are a few quotes to consider. In her book Safeguards, Shielding Our Homes and Equipping Our Kids, Julie Lowe writes, "What do I mean when I use the term safeguards? It means working to establish a home and a worldview that protects your children. Parents are the first line of defense." The musician Chris Cornell, who on the Tavis Smiley Show in 2011 said the following: "Children should always feel like the adults are living in this world to nurture them, to take care of them, to protect them from any bad thing that might come." And Erin Merrin from the book An Unimaginable Act: "If someone would have talked in school about safe touch and unsafe touch, I believe I would have spoken up as a child and not been victimized over and over again for years. But that day never came, which is why my mission now is to protect children from the childhood I could not be protected from." And finally, in his authorized book of quotations, Nelson Mandela, published in 2011, "Safety and security don't just happen. They are the result of collective consensus and public investment. We owe our children, the most vulnerable citizens in our society, a life free of violence and fear." And on that note, Jenny, I would love you to introduce our guests who are doing amazing work in this difficult field.
Thank you, Penny. For this topic today, we've got guests from UK and Australia. So it'll be fantastic to get those perspectives from across the globe. Obviously, there's everything in between as well, but it's really nice to have that global perspective here today. So first up is Dr. Catherine Nibbs, is a consultant child-adult psychotherapist specialising in the effects of online harm. She is a cyber psychologist, researcher, clinician, author of 7 books so far, and a mum. She created cyber trauma theory after her own children were exposed to graphic and gory media on a flip phone in 2010. She is the CEO of Children and Tech Training Academy, where professionals can learn to apply cyber ethics and cyber trauma theory to child protection and safeguarding systems in your setting. And Christine McVie is a former detective senior constable, specialist child interviewer, and straight-talking child abuse prevention educator who doesn't sugarcoat the truth. With over a decade in law enforcement as a Western Australia police officer, investigating child sexual abuse and 9 years interviewing vulnerable children, she has seen the devastating cost of silence, shame, and systems that fail. Since leaving the police in 2020 with a PTSD diagnosis and a burning mission, Christy has become a sought-after keynote speaker, best-selling author of Operation KidSafe, and a leading voice in proactive, protective parenting education. Okay, Penny, let's get this conversation started.
Amazing. I would like to turn to Catherine first this morning. Delighted that you could join us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Your clients that you've been working for I think at least over 15 years, have told you that what they experience online is not like normal trauma. From a safeguarding perspective, why does that distinction matter so much? And what are we getting wrong in how we are responding to this?
Okay. I am going to add on to your introduction around safeguarding earlier. One of the things I think we don't include in the safeguarding definitions is safeguarding also includes mitigation from further harm. And that mitigation from further harm is where the professionals are really coming in, and the way in which we work with children, the way we talk to them after an event has occurred, the way in which we then support them going forward. Now, as a psychotherapist, my job is really to the lay public to help heal. Well, actually, it's also about giving people inner resources, helping them understand what has taken place. And in the words of one of the most well-known kind of trauma books that exists, from Bessel van der Kolk, this horrible thing occurred and it now has no longer, it now no longer affects me. It now has no effect on my life because I can understand it. I've processed it. I have made amends with all of the elements that I need to make amends with, and I can move forward. That sticks to real world trauma because if I give you a little bit of an insight, during my PhD, I went to the trauma literature to find information on what I call cyber trauma and the effects of online harm. And since the seminal book written in 1996 that most trauma therapists lean on, aside from my cyber trauma and sexual harms book, there is not one book written about the kinds of trauma from the online world, which is astounding, given this is now 30 years since the 1996 seminal book by Judith Herman. So in your question, Penny, you've asked like normal trauma. It's incredible to say trauma is trauma, and there are variants of trauma in terms of how it affects a person. But what trauma is this particular thing happened to me, and I can come and tell you about my story. And what I'm going to say about the whether we call it virtual trauma, cyber trauma, digital trauma, the reason the distinction exists is in all other circumstances, the event has taken place. And unless it was on, for example, a car accident on CCTV, you cannot go back and revisit that trauma. It is a memory that you recall, that you articulate, that you discuss with somebody. And since kind of 2010, when these clients were coming in, what they were saying, particularly in respect of child sexual abuse and sexual exploitation, is at any time, Kath, at any time now or in the future, that can be repeated. I can revisit it. It can be shared by somebody. So let's take, for example, the biggest crisis of today, where children are coerced into sending any kind of image that might be classified as child sexual abuse material. So we call that CSAM. What can happen is for the rest of that person's life, that material can re-emerge at any point. And that is not included in any of the trauma literature in terms of what I call a healthy paranoia. It is absolutely healthy to think who's seen it, where is it being shared, when will it be re-uploaded, will I be sent it in the future, will people know it's me, will people have identifying information about me? And helping a client understand that is incredibly difficult. And then when I'm trying to explain that to therapists, saying, so show me any other kind of trauma where that issue is in parallel. And aside from people who have been through kind of interpersonal violence and they know they're the person who was violent with them, this isn't like any other trauma. And this can be the same for cyberbullying, for images that are doctored, for being doxed, for kind of suicide material, self-harm material. It goes on and on and on. And there are, as I've named, around about 67 different types of cyber trauma.
67.
Yeah.
And it's, Catherine, as you speak as well, and especially the mention of coercion, for me, what, if you could expand on it as well, a lot of people might think that that's I was also thinking about you saying like that sort of blackmail, but that's a kind of strong demand or control of you must do this otherwise, but actually that coercion can be really subtle, really, it can go on for ages, and it's not like that one act, I'd say, or that one conversation or that one decision that someone makes to ask someone, it can be actually, when you think of, or anyone in any relationship, you can be put in a situation where you don't really realize, and sometimes probably the person that is doing it might not realize as much, that coercive control, it can really build up, and then you think you've participated or exchanged information in a safe space, or and that can change so quickly. So I don't know if there's anything more around the coercion you wanted to share.
Yeah, it's all rooted in attachment. So, parents are coercive, children are coercive, and we do that because we are trying to get our needs met. It is not manipulation, and the coercion is our way of succeeding and thriving within our family. And sometimes, I'm going to talk like a therapist now, that can be dysfunctional. It can be the idea of, children very quickly learn to do a particular voice, which most adults will refer to as whining. They learn, if I do this voice and I keep using this, I will get what I want and what I need. And it might be a drink of juice. It could be the iPad, right? And what happens in many of these situations, and this is really where I help therapists understand, is there are children who sadly are in the bathroom, in the bedroom with devices, and that includes webcams as well as the smartphone. We're probably going to get onto this later on, in terms of why these social media bans are not even worth the paper they're printed on, because these are children who don't even know sometimes they're talking to somebody who is coercing them into doing things like, oh, I bet you could do a handstand. And it's not necessarily anything that many of us would think about, because what we tend to do is find ourselves being conscripted into frightening language. And what I mean by that, at the moment, the media is frightening a lot of parents, a lot of people, and we need to be aware. But what is happening is we're being told, children are being coerced into producing really graphic, horrible. They're not in all cases. Some of it can be subtle, and those lower level, smiling and standing in a particular way. And then those images are captured and changed by AI or Photoshop. Let's go back to, we don't need AI to do some of what's being talked about at the moment. And the perpetrators of crimes against children are well aware that they can pick and choose. They can pick and choose who they talk to, because all they need is one child out of all of the children that are online to behave in a way that they would like them to. And, lots of the children I work with can detect sometimes that it's an unknown stranger, what they tend to call a rando or a randomer or a creep, or, children have their own language and they will quickly shut these conversations down. However, when it comes to vulnerabilities that you talked about in the safeguarding description, Penny, earlier, we're talking about children, and children by default are vulnerable regardless of any other criteria. And that is what is exploited by other people, children to children, teenagers to children, adults to children.
Yeah, 100%. What do you think are the signs then that a young person, so say if it was happening to my child, what are typical signs that might be displayed that cyber trauma might be going on, something that's happening?
So the first thing I would say to all parents is, your child better than anybody else, and you're looking for any detectable change, right? And it's really difficult to say these are the three signs. That's the internet meme culture. Mm-hmm. The signs are children's nervous system change. When we are affected by something that upsets us, that scares us, that makes us worried, what we tend to do is ruminate. Excuse me. And this includes, 4 or 5-year-old children go, oh, if I tell mummy that, she'll be cross, versus a child who might be, oh, if I tell my mummy that, she's going to take the phone off me. So children are capable of ruminating about consequences. And what will happen is often it might be a physical display, it might be an emotional display, and it might be a behavioural display. And you know your child. You are looking for changes where, why have they gone quiet all of a sudden? Why won't they? Or why are they? Or where are they going? You know, why are they spending all of their time in their bedroom when previously they didn't do that? Why do they jump every time the phone rings? Why, you know, why are they wet in the bed? Why are they crying so much? It can be anything. And this is one of the things about safeguarding, isn't it? We look for the signs that are written down as though it's a recipe for, now I can detect a child in distress. Well, a child in distress displays it in whatever way they display it.
And I think, you know, as you described, the natural, in relationships, that natural coercion exists, and that isn't always identified or seen as negative. So children could be going through the early stages, and it might not be traumatic yet, or a negative experience or a scary experience, but actually that's why the signs or the indicators, you know, you need to keep your mind open to the physical behavior, actions, you know, like, you know, the use of the device, or, you know, the responses to, you know, any questions or things like that. And I think as well, for me, it's I think we so easily can put a lot of the ownership, and rightly so, that it's, you know, it does, as one of the quotes that Penny shared, it starts with the parents, so that ownership naturally lands with the parents. But it's understanding, like, well, what are the parameters in which your family is operating? And as every child, every person responds differently, every family operates differently. So, you know, you might be comfortable that your child is spending this much time, is up in their bedroom with a device or without a device, and but it's actually understanding what's going on behind that, and just having those, I think, conversations, I think, are really important, just to know, without that drilling at them and trying to have total control. It's just having that openness of discussion.
Yeah, I'm sure that Christy can tell you, in terms of probably when she's doing the interviews, the way in which these conversations starts, it's generally not, apart from what we call the scattergun direct technique, which is people who are just like, send me a picture of, you know, there's no airs and graces, no building a relationship with a child, which is often how we teach them about grooming. But certainly when we think about parents and families, there are many different types of parenting, you know, that's in research, but also the world in which children grow up is confusing. And this is around the word consent. So often we teach consent to 11 plus around sexual relationships. But and I've talked about this in my sexual harms book. Think about a toddler who says, I don't want to eat my broccoli. And then the parent says, you're going to eat the broccoli. That child goes, I have no autonomy, no agency. I don't want to wear my shoes. And the parent says, you're putting your blinking shoes on, and shoves the shoes on. And then we get told, by the way, you have complete autonomy to say no. Right, but children don't get a chance to say no. And when they do say, why? No, I don't want to. We, as the parents, enforce our belief, and it comes from a place of, we don't want to be judged as being rubbish parents. So what we say is, put your shoes on. And, you know, there will be people who are listening to this saying, well, the child should put their shoes on. Well, maybe we could take time to say, because outside there might be things that could hurt your feet. And then we put the shoes on and say, and I know you don't want me to put the shoes on. And we have the conversation about, I understand you have a right to say what you feel, but as the adult, I need to make this choice because. Now, I would be perceived as being a liberal parent for recommending that we talk to our children. But because we don't, children don't have an understanding of the world. And there lies the problem.
I'm going to say that
I'd
is
love
that
to.
being liberal because things have changed so much. The childhood that we were talking, saying 11, we start to have these conversations on certain subjects. Times have changed. And when we were 11, we were not exposed exactly to content that is out there now and what's going on. So in a way, it's how can we, and we say this so much with the tweens that we've worked with as well, that you're having these conversations, we can start them so much early. We don't have to have the same conversation, but if we start early enough, isn't that wiser than just suddenly saying, well, we'll just wait 11 years and then we'll begin the conversation?
That's where parents feel disempowered because we haven't given parents the tools to have those conversations. Over to you, Christy. Yeah.
I think Kath and I are on the same page here because my whole premise, I talk about preventative education, but it's not about let's prevent abuse. Let's prevent our kids being left in harm's way or not knowing how to help themselves or help seek. And so for me personally, I became a police officer when my daughter was 2, a specialist child interviewer when she was 3. I've been talking to my daughter about body safety, consent, bodily autonomy, her whole childhood. She's 18 now. And the thing that really stuck out for me is that the kids who knew this stuff and had parents who talked about this stuff, they came forward straight away. They were the ones who were, maybe they were in harm's way, but the risk was reduced. The harm was mitigated. They were supported. They were able to move on quicker. Whereas the kids who had no one to go to, no one to talk to, they were left in harm's way for years and they were being abused for years. And that's what leaves that real big trauma on the child. So for me, I'm all about, early conversations. We don't have to talk about pornography. We don't have to talk about nudes to little toddlers. I was saying, hey, if we had the body safety conversations where, my privates are my privates, yours are yours. No one's allowed to touch your privates. I'm not allowed to touch your privates, etc., unless, for certain purposes, for safe and unsafe, etc. And then when it came to talking about, if you see anyone with their private parts showing on your device, come and tell mummy, you'll never be in trouble. I just need to know so that we can make sure that you don't see that, because that's not for little kids. And then if you ever see two people with their private parts showing, or they look like they're wrestling with no clothes on, come and tell mummy, you'll never be in trouble, because it's not something for kids. I was having these conversations with my 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then when she did see porn at 10, she came to me and said, Mum, I've seen porn. And she knew that word. She knew, so she came to me, we had a conversation, we talked it out. I checked in with her days after. I have been doing this with my own child for her whole childhood. And I've only got the test subject of 1, but I do know from my experience of hundreds of interviews that the kids that had these conversations had a safe person to have these conversations with, who opened up the door and left the door open for them, because kids will test us with the small stuff before they trust us with the big stuff. And if you do not give them an opportunity to have conversations that are small and not high pressure and not, when they do have something big to come and tell you, they will come and tell you, or they'll at least make, you'll know when something's going on. But if you don't ever have those conversations and you wait till 11, at 11, it's too late. And so our kids need us to have conversations way before then to open the door, because most of my childhood conversations didn't happen, and I got my period and then it was like, don't go reading every Tom, Dick and Harry. Who the hell is Tom, Dick and Harry? I had no idea who they were. I never went to my parents for anything. Our parents left us high and dry, and I do believe, yes, there's a lot of changes in childhood, but there's still a lot of things that are the same, and we just need to do it better.
Yeah. And I think, Christy, as well, it's those conversations, but also to make sure that you give the space for your children to understand it. So it might be like, oh, if you see that, that's not for children, but you need to, I think it's important to give that space for them to say why, or
of course.
Some examples, my son was doing a video on my husband's work phone, and he happened to have no clothes on. So obviously he ended that some of the footage, and obviously we said, Isaac, don't, you can't take videos with no clothes on. He said, why? And we had to have that broader conversation with him to say, okay, so there was a boundary put in, and we've also had conversations with, obviously it's wider with, the devices, and he wanted one very early at age because he knew kids that were older that were getting them. So he thought it was something to aspire to. And I started those conversations earlier, and I say, you know, and we've had similar ones about AI. If you put it out there, it's out there. You have no control. And we created a picture of a young, a 7-year-old blonde boy for AI because he wanted to do a little poster or something. And he's like, Mummy, how do they know that's what I look like? And I was like, well, you've never put your photo up, so that isn't you. It just looks like you because you are a boy of that age and you've got blonde hair. But he was actually, because we'd had the conversations, he could sort of see it and get that understanding that this is all kind of out there. And he, as you're saying, Christy, he will probably come across it or have those experiences with it, but we can talk about it, and I might not have all the answers or really understand how it works or why it all happens, but we can figure it out together. And I think that space it's again a lot for parents, especially if their understanding or confidence around it isn't there, or experience to talk about it. But it can be not as simple as that, but you know, those steps I think can be quite straightforward.
I just wanted to add, just the best statement that I can give parents or anyone who's working with children is to say, oh, that's really interesting. You know what? No one ever talked to me about that. How about we go and find it out together? Or how about I come back to you and we have a conversation? And the last thing to that is if you do have a serious conversation or even just a semi-serious conversation, come back in 24 hours or 48 hours and say, hey, you know, that conversation we had about porn the other day, have you got any questions? Because that you're keeping the door open and you keep coming back to it and you keep showing that you're willing to hear them and for them to have some buy-in, to have some say, to have, you know, like that it's important to you.
Yep.
You know, it's not a one and done conversation. I'm sure Kath will agree.
Yeah, well, you're encouraging the why, aren't you? Because children do have questions. You know, think about even when they do. I mean, the word Pythagoras comes up a lot in my therapy room about, and generally for children saying they don't know why they have to learn it. But there is something about the day you get taught about Pythagoras, it's mind-blowing. You go away and you're like,
in
so
one
this
way
is
or
a
the
gen-
other.
Oh, yeah. In terms of, you know, children will say things like, I don't even know who Pythagoras is. Well, there's a question. Well, let's go and have a look at who Pythagoras was and why he invented this thing and why we don't actually need it in much of our daily work, unless, of course, you're an engineer doing CAD designs, unless of course you're an architect, so there are, and I will sit with the children and say, so in specific situations this is really important, but if you're going to go off and do hair, probably not. If you're going to go off and do construction, it might be really important. And I can have those conversations with children because the moment they tell me their opinion, it now means that I can do exactly what Christy's done there, which is, okay, and what are your questions about that? Why is that your opinion? Why do you think like that? And parents, it is okay to say, I don't know. It is totally okay not to be the oracle of all knowledge, you know, and that's one of the things that I hadn't realised until I was doing my training. Being able to say to my children as they were growing up, well, I don't know that. I don't know why that is. Because actually, I don't understand why people do some things, even as a psychotherapist. And you know, if you think about the biggest genre of TV programs that are watched and the biggest genre of books that are read, it is true crime.
Yeah.
Because we're fascinated. So we can't possibly know.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking like around that anxiety or that shame or whatever as well, that if as a parent you're projecting that's exactly the problem again, isn't it? Because if you're not sort of saying it's okay, let's discuss this, I feel like there's a sort of shame behind it that we collectively don't want to be vulnerable. But if we can be vulnerable, then our children can be vulnerable with us, and then you can have those conversations.
Oh, Penny, you've beautifully led me into the most shaming narrative of Jonathan Haidt's work. He has shamed and frightened so many parents with, look at these figures, look at these figures, look at these figures. And what has happened is over the last 2 or 3 years, parents have effectively felt like they've had the finger pointed at them. You gave them the devices. Look at this. Many children, most children, all children. And then grandiose language is what it's called. What has happened is the more you hear words like all children are self-harming, all children are, the more you begin to go, not my child. And what we then do is we go into a stress response ourselves, talk about, cyber trauma. We go into a stress response, and it's almost like we say, right, well, I'm going to take the thing away that I've been told is the really bad element, without understanding what's happened is our children have gone into environments that we didn't recognize. And earlier, you kind of talked about you can't see the conversations online. You can if they're in a public domain in which we are also there. So I use the metaphor of a digital city park and shopping centres. If you go to the shopping centres, you know what the shops are. If you go in the shops, you know what merchandise is on sale, for example. And what has happened with the whole anxious generation narrative is, well, you let them in there. You didn't pay attention to them. You didn't take care of them. And it's that constant finger pointing. When we go into shame, when we feel attacked, we go into shutdown. And that's essentially what's happened as a broader feeling across the world. And it's led us into this place about, well, we'll just take it away from them without really understanding what it is and where children are going and what we need to do in order to make sure those environments are safe. And sadly, as a result of this, I think what is going to happen now is those environments do not now have to put the safeguards in place, because their response is going to be, well, children shouldn't be on here anyway.
And it's almost like if we could just all collectively hold up our hands and all just say, you know what, we're all in the same boat. We all didn't sign up for what this is because we didn't really know what it was. And maybe unintentionally there has been stuff. I maybe let my kids go on this or do this. And we collectively say we're not quite sure how to deal with it. Then we can collectively move forward together and go, right,
yes, how
do we change this? What can we do better? But if we're ashamed, nothing will happen. It will just lead to inaction and passivity. It's just...
And I think Penny and I are very passionate about creating spaces, this for conversations, and this podcast being one of them. But we also want to bring that into events that our biggest ambition is that parents and their young people can attend to explore the topics that matter to them. And that's through our Are You Really Listening framework. But we're realising that, and I think you kind of confirmed it for me, Catherine, or for us, but it's like people have... they're tired and they're busy, but they're tired of being their finger pointed at, and we've got to be really smart. So, are you really listening? Is very accusative, and we've realised that. So we're doing it around a curiosity-led, collaborative learning. There's no blame. It's a lot of messages to try and and convince people, and people are living in a world are being blamed, where even going back to like parenting styles, as you touched on, like, oh, you should do this, gentle parenting versus this versus that, or this. It's a minefield of what we should and shouldn't be doing. And I think it also comes with we've got these important compulsory things like safeguarding that we have to be aware of, but that's still blurred. And don't let them have devices in their room, and it's like, well, what if you already have? How do you support people in changing that? Like, rather than going into what the parents having the authority or having to pass down the authority from a government, not about the phones in rooms, but you know what I mean, saying, well, you just can't do that now. And it's like, well, where's once again, the conversations and the understanding? And that's what I think we all need support with. And then you'll have more confidence and opportunity to say, I don't know how to do it, or I need help, or what should I do? So yeah, I think that's what we're learning as well. And it's just making sure that, people know that there are places to go and help to get where you won't be judged. But we're all living in a world where whatever you do is going to get a like or a response or not. It's across everything.
Yeah, I have hope that that is changing, and I hope that, we are beginning to talk more, and that we'll come to that point where we can collectively sort of say, hey, how can we all move forward together? You can always hope. So I'd love to move on to you now, Christy. You worked as a detective in child sex abuse investigations, and I would love to know so for parents who are listening, or for anyone, what grooming actually looks like in practice, and whether it's very different to what parents might imagine in the first place.
Yeah, so grooming, it was one of the things that, in hindsight, you would see, or parents would see it after the fact, because it can be very subtle, and it can be like one of the things that I say all the time, it's not everyone, it can be anyone. And so it's really subtle. And so it can start off. And one of the things that most people don't realize is that a predator or a child sex offender, or someone who's looking to find a victim, they are grooming you from the get-go. There's no difference between how they behave with you versus how they behave with the next adult. They are grooming everyone. So for instance, they will groom adults. If it's in-person abuse, it's a bit different online, but in person, they are going to groom the adults first, because they want access if they're not in the family. And, some of the stats, and it's the similar stats for the UK, 90% of child sexual abuse in-person contact offending is by someone known to the child. So a family member, friend, a peer, etc. So the thing is that that person's going around with like this, I'm a really cool person, I'm really good to you, so they essentially love bomb the child and make that child feel special. They give them gifts, they treat them really well, whilst they're also, creating a wedge between the child and the parent, so that or say, for instance, I'm just thinking about one instance. It was a teacher, and the teacher was like, over this side, they're love bombing the child with, you're special, I'm the only one who gets you kind of language, no one will understand. And then also it was a young teenager, you can talk to me about anything, I'll never judge you, I'll always be there. And over here, they're telling the parent that, little Christy's actually, really struggling right now, really needs a strong mentor in their life. So, I'm happy to take that on. I'm happy to take that role on, that, and then creating that space where they can get that child alone with them. So, Christy's really looking forward to this weekend. I'm going to take Christy to the beach and, give you guys a break because she's struggling at the moment. You're struggling at the moment. So the thing is that there's a lot of like small little things that look like care and nurture, but they're actually specifically built to create a wedge between the safe adult and the child, and also make the child feel good. You mentioned earlier about grooming, or like the coerciveness of it feels good until it doesn't. And so a lot of the time it's like, I'm special, I'm this, I get special treats, I get all of this stuff. And then the abuse starts happening, or it starts making the child feel uncomfortable, yet they feel indebted to the person. So they feel like they owe them now, or that's the only person that understands them or believes them. And then over here, the parents are like, oh, I can see that Christy's really like, really connected with this person. So, I'm happy. And so in the meantime, they're giving them porn. If it's a young teenager, they might be giving them alcohol. They might be talking about sexualized things and testing what the child tells the parent or the safe person. So they're testing, do they go to the parent or the adult, the safe adult, and say something? They might test them with touches and, maybe inappropriate jokes or inappropriate language. Does the child go and report it? Now, if the child says anything, well, potentially that's game over for that child, and that person moves on to the next family, next child. Or they might just keep on at it. And I think Kath said something about, unless they're there is 3 different types of sex offenders. So, there's predatory offenders or persistent offenders. They only attracted to children, they will have struggled to have adult relationships, so they're very likely to stick to just childlike relationships, put themselves in environments with lots of children, etc. Then you've got opportunistic offenders. They've got 2 different types. They can have adult relationships and then abuse children because they're attracted to both. And then there's the situational offender, not attracted to children, it's all about power and control. And so they might lose their job, they might have an argument with their partner, and then they go on to harm a child because of that. And that's just generalizing it all. But, so who they target is based on trust, if they're trusted with the child, and have the time alone with them, so that equals the opportunity to abuse. And so it's an interesting one. It's very like I said, in hindsight, a lot of parents used to say to me, I just wish I had known what to watch out for. And that's been my mission since I left the police, is to talk about this stuff, because if the more people who know, and some people do show grooming signs without the abusiveness about it. A lot of our older generation will say, don't tell mum and dad when they give them a treat, because they don't want to get in trouble by parents for giving them a lolly or a cake. But that's also, I used to call it out on my daughter's grandparents, because, that's also a grooming behavior. Don't tell, this is just our little secret kind of thing. And so that's something that we need to be more mindful of as parents, and also of calling out behaviors that could be grooming. It doesn't mean that everyone's grooming and trying to abuse children, not at all. But, when we call those behaviors out, when we label them and name them in front of kids, especially when they get older, it helps them identify possibly online grooming. It helps them identify when people are, manipulating them and coercing them.
And Christy, hearing that, and obviously as a parent, and our listeners, mostly our parents, and the situational one is the one that I think a lot of people will have the most fear and lack of control over, or feel like they maybe have lack of control. And you touched on it when you said, actually, like the access. So that's something we would, you wouldn't let your child spend time with an adult that you didn't know. But then sometimes they are known and they are perceived as safe. And I don't know if there's any more that you can share about that situational, because for me, that's a bit like, so I'll use an example, maybe this will make my ask a bit clear, but there's, certain families, people that will not let their kids go to sleepovers, for example. And, that rationale behind it is understood, and, it's there. Is there anything else you can say, not saying there's the things you should and shouldn't do, but anything else to share with parents around that, understanding that situational, how it might look, or the stages it could take, just to give people a bit more confidence if there was someone that, their child might be spending time with, but it could potentially be the wrong relationship?
Yeah, so situational offenders are more likely to, it's the more violent sexual offences. So opportunistic offenders, they're the more like, and just in my mind, I've got a couple of examples of like the dad of the best friend. They're the one who's like, laying it on thick, asking, paying a lot of attention to a young person. The situational offenders, like I said, that there's about 10% in Australia, but it's globally, it's about the same. I think the US has higher stats, but it's going to be, when we don't let our kids go to the park, we think, oh, stranger danger, white man, the van with the white van with the giving lollies to kids or asking to come and get the puppy. That's about 10% of all sexual abuse. The rest is all going to be someone known to your child who is, and in Australia, and I think it's very much, and Kath might be able to add this, peer-on-peer abuse is very high. So it's around 30 to 50%, nearly 50%, where, children can be harmed by another child on a sleepover, where they feel like they have to go along with something, or it is forced on them. And so for me personally, I think what it is that, yeah, I know all of this stuff. I still let my daughter go on sleepovers with certain conditions met. I still let my daughter go to play dates. I still let her go to the park on her own. But it was more about the fact that I knew, and again, we can't 100% abuse proof our kids. We can't 100%, protect them from everything and wrap them up in cotton wool. That is not possible, and it's not possible for us, and it's not possible for them. But what we can do is enable and equip them with the information that's important. What are your body safety rules? What are they? If someone asks you to keep a secret from mum and dad or your safe persons, well, we need to know that. What do you do next? Like I used to call it, what to do if questions, like what could you do if such and such happened? What could you do if you didn't feel safe on a sleepover? What could you do if someone asked you to keep a secret from mummy or daddy? What could you do if? Or what could kids do if? And so what I was actually doing was giving my daughter scenarios that helped her understand what she could do. And it was a calm space. Like we're talking during bedtime when we know that there's a sleepover in a couple of nights. We're talking when she went to the beach when she was 13, going to the beach with a few friends on her own. And I dropped them off and I picked them up, but, they wanted to be there on their own. I let her do that, but I had a conversation with her saying, what could you do if someone makes you feel uncomfortable on the beach? What could you do if someone is, using their phone or something and you feel like they might be recording you? That was like a week before, like we were prepping for that. And she was like, well, I would call you, Mum, and I would get you to come and come and pick us up. Or we would go up to the kiosk and we would go get something, So it wasn't about, adding, like putting these ideas into her head, because we'd been having body safety conversations and conversations about, what could kids do if someone asked them to send a picture of their private parts when she was 6 and 7 years old. And because we'd had the language that safe and unsafe, appropriate, inappropriate, private parts versus public parts, secrets versus surprises, we'd been having those conversations for such a long time that it's just language. And so my daughter was like, I would go this, I would do that, and it wasn't until I didn't realize that all of these scenarios were similar to what I did in the police, right? Every year I had to go and do my qualification on my firearm, my taser, and all of the things. And I used to have to practice high risk vehicle stops and active shooter drills. Never used them my whole career, but I did them every year anyway, right? And I practiced my firearm every year. Never used my firearm in 10 years. We're pretty lucky in Australia. But I just realized that after a while, I was doing these scenarios with my daughter, so she was ready. And even as a 3 and 4 year old, I'd say, what would, she was going to kindy or to early childhood education daycare. I said, what could you do if someone asks you to show you their private parts? And she'd be like, I would go and tell my Miss Tracy. And okay, well, I'm going to pretend that I'm someone at daycare and I'm going to ask you to see your private parts. And you're going to tell me you're going to practice how you're going to do that. And I would say, hey, little girl, can you show me your private parts? And she would giggle because she was like, I'm not little girl, I'm. And so then she would be like, and I go, okay, what would you say next? And she'd go, no, those are my private parts. They're only for me. And then I would say, what do you do next? And she would run off and like go pretend she's going to go find Miss Tracy. And literally, she never had to use it. But the thing to me was I wanted her to know how to seek help. I wanted her to do what to do next. And I think the thing is that most parents feel fear around adding these topics to their children's vocabulary, adding these things. But what we don't realize is that when children know what to do, they are more empowered. They know that I can come and have a conversation with my mum and dad because they've already taught me what it is. I can come and have a conversation with my safe person because they have already shown me that it's okay to make mistakes and I know what to do. And one of the things, like I said, my daughter saw porn at 10. I had never made a big deal about porn. At the time she told me, I thought I'd locked down everything, and I was still a detective at the time. But she just stumbled across it because she was doing puberty education at school. And what do we tell our kids when we don't know something? Go Google it. What did she Google? Sex. And what came up? Porn. 25 freaking million pages of porn came up. She watched a minute of it, was disgusted, came to me, and we discussed what she saw, and we had a conversation. I checked in with her. I made sure she felt safe again. I then had another conversation with her 24 hours later. The first time someone tried to online groom her, she said, hey, Mum, I think this is a groomer. Showed me the thing. I didn't react. I just said, oh, good work. Caught it out. Well done. And then we kept going. Like I said, if they'll test you with the small stuff before they trust you with the big stuff.
Yeah. And I think, Christy, as well, you showing that it goes back to the conversations, like you're saying, but actually that's where parents need to put the energy, and like we can worry and scenario, not even plan, but scenario, like freak out about certain scenarios in our heads. But actually, if we put that energy into those conversations and learning the language, maybe even researching it ourselves, how to and how it would work in our family and where are those calm spaces and opportunities to do so, then it's 100% more
But you
effective.
almost don't need that many resources to do that either, because if you're having the conversations, then you've got that openness as well. So you don't have to necessarily have all of the answers, but you're talking to one another, which is. But I was just thinking, actually, when you were talking about your daughter, my daughter's literally recently been going around the house telling us all what her code name is or code word that will be dropped into the conversation if she's at a sleepover or if she's someone's house, which will be dropped in, and that is "get me out of here now." And she brought that up.
That's
herself.
not a code word.
I'm not going to tell you. What I did want to ask, because I know we could talk about this for hours, but you both actually mentioned before we started the podcast today about broken systems. And I did want to touch upon that because we've spoken a lot about parenting and about their responsibility there. But what about, government, organizations, education, whoever would like to answer? I mean, Kristen,
How long
Have you
Right. Yeah, it's, for me, there's something around the systems with which I work in are obviously based around children, child protection, safeguarding. Of course, I spend a lot of time in education, children's social care, policing, places like that. What I tend to find, and this is going back to, I can't remember if I said it on the show or just before, the phrase "I didn't know" is the one in which it accompanies every client. I didn't know. And the reason I'm going to say the systems are broken is because we are siloed, we are fragmented around the world, we are not communicating with each other. And what that actually translates into, parents were not given this information in 1998. They weren't given this information in 2007 with the first iPhone. What is being given now is frightening information, but not the full picture. And it's still resulting in "I didn't know." And for me, that's why the system's broken. If we can help people understand social media is an environment, gaming is an environment, and as parents, I often do this as a task. I will say to parents, so when you go to the local park, what are you doing as a risk assessment? Well, we make sure that the equipment is safe, and we look at who's around, and we look at the dogs, and we look at the pads, and we look at the trees, and you do a risk assessment. But also, we do the risk assessment based on our child's capabilities. So a 2-year-old is not allowed to wander out of our sight. A 15-year-old, we probably wouldn't be following around the park. We would have separate conversations. And what I've said to parents is, and somebody, whoever that might be, whether it's government, education, systems, policing, didn't tell you in the digital environment, these are the risks you need to assess for. So I'm going to go back to something you were just discussing then, Christy, and kind of Penny and Jenny talked about it. I use gaming in therapy. And what I will do is hand the children, and say we're playing Fortnite or Minecraft, I use whatever resources are at my table, so to speak. I will say, "Oh, isn't that interesting? You've just changed the avatar on that. I wonder if anybody else does that online." We're now discussing other people's behaviour. "Oh, look at that. Bluey or Peppa Pig has just done, they're not wearing any clothes. I wonder if other people do that, or if you've seen that, or if. Yeah. And it's really going into that conversational space, because you know what? Even if we take social media away from these children, they are still going to be in environments where these groomers are. They are still going to be in environments. And that's the bit that hasn't been communicated. So we are creating yet another broken system. There we are. I've done with my rant. I'll just sit quietly now.
I'll add to that in regards to, because Australia's obviously had the social media ban for last, I don't know how long now, since last November or something. 70% of kids are still online on social media, and that's fine. I actually said when it was first announced that they were bringing in the social media ban that it wasn't this generation that was going to benefit. It will be the generations coming. And the reason for that is because legislation is only as good as the first time it's tested in court. And so legislatively, from the policing perspective, until it's tested and until the social media companies are held in court and held to a standard, then nothing is going to change for our kids. And we've obviously had kids are bypassing their digital, like the ID and the age verification. Kids are bypassing it through whatever means. Parents are still allowing it. I'm a big firm believer, and I actually kept my daughter off social media until nearly 13. She was a sneaky one, and this is the thing. Like, I don't fault parents for allowing it. I don't fault parents. What I do think is that my analogy for for online world is that it's like the ocean, right? We don't just throw our kids in and expect them to swim. We have to, supervise them, teach them to swim, maybe put some floaties on, give them that guidance, and then eventually we might, because there's going to be sharks, there's going to be jellyfish, there's going to be all of these other things happening. So why don't we, if we teach the internet like it's the ocean or a pool, we put a boundary in place, we help them set up, safety networks around them, we teach them to swim in it, we supervise them while they're in the water, we do all of that. Then as they get better swimmers in the ocean or in this pool, we can pull back a little bit. And then we've got, and so for me, my daughter actually got social media. Apple did it. We had after the porn incident, we had a little bit of a reshuffle. We had a conversation about, boundaries and stuff like that. She always had time restrictions and limits, because for me, I was like, okay, I don't want her to spend, she wasn't never allowed to, charge her phone or iPad in the bedroom. It was always in the lounge room or in a public space. We online gamed together, Kath. I sat and did Minecraft and all of the horrible games that I couldn't play properly, but I would sit there, because that's the other thing. When you want to have conversations with kids, you've got to be where they are. I would ask questions like, oh, yeah, that's interesting. Can you block people if someone's really rude to you? Do you ever see someone talking rudely or asking inappropriate questions? Do you have anything that makes you, oh, who's that friend? How do you know them? So I was sitting there playing the games and being involved in the game with her, not looking at face to face. She still at 18 asks me to go for a drive if she wants to have a tough conversation with me, because most of my conversations were in the car or going to bed or gaming with her. And the thing is that with our social media ban, it was never, it's so parents feel the confidence. I don't know where it's going to go, and I have no comments on it, because other than, hey, it's here for us, it's going to be there for you guys. I would like to see social media companies be held to account for what they've done.
Yep.
And that is what I want the social media ban and all of that to do, is to hold them to account, because they have done this on purpose. They have groomed, conditioned, and coerced and manipulated and abused kids, and they had the power to stop it years ago. In 2010, I was seeing kids sending, we were charging people and charging kids and putting them on sex offender registers for sending nudes. And in Australia introduced legislation, intimate image abuse legislation, in 2016, so they no longer went on the child sex offender register. And so now we're in 10 years, this has been a problem for most of us who worked in this industry. We've been crying out for 15 years that this is an issue. So social media companies have made us all believe that it's normal to post all our lives on air. I had a child sex offender once say to me, because he had a whole heap of child photos on his phone, all taken from people's social media or taken at the park or wherever. And he said it's not illegal to be a creep. He was a registered child sex offender, and we could not do anything with those images. And that is what we need to remember, is that they don't need child abuse material to do what they want. Now we've got AI. They don't even need anything. And Kath, you commented on, I know from your social media, you were the first person to call out that case in the UK with that school and the soccer team or whatever it was, the football team. It's a massive deal, and we need to rethink it, and we need to think how much of our social media interactions, what we do online, have we been conditioned to believe that that's normal.
And where are those people who are grooming then moving to anyway? If we're locking that down, is it moving into gaming spaces? How are we potentially...
they're already there. Yeah, they're already there. They're everywhere.
Protect that. I mean, it's just beyond belief. What I did want to ask about awareness, I suppose, for adults about this. Of course, we're having conversations like today, but how else do we talk to adults about this and make greater awareness? Is this funding that we need? We need to have more
it's a public health thing.
Yeah.
It's definitely a public health thing. We've got ads on the TV now about child sexual abuse in Australia and about online abuse. They're very, very short, very sharp. They're basically an adult. One of the ads is an adult on their device or like their phone, their younger sibling sitting next to them, and they're like, or their child maybe, oh, if anyone ever makes you feel uncomfortable online, you can always come and talk to me. That's how simple the ad is. And then there's like resources. We've had a lot of money put into this, but still not enough at all. And again, the systems over here are so broken. I think they're worldwide in that we don't support enough. There's not enough resources. There's not enough education. There's not enough, when something does happen, with regards to someone, going to get them charged just online is almost impossible to find them. There's some good work by the FBI and other departments, but if your child's being online groomed and extorted or exploited online, there's a very low probability that they'll actually end in any charges. And they have that fear. I have young people contact me online and they're asking me for advice. And the first thing I say to them is, that you're a victim. I hope you know that you're a victim. You haven't done anything wrong. You are not it is not your fault. So yeah, I just think there's so much going on there. But
yeah, I think I'm going to reflect actually. Jenny, when you were talking about are we really listening? Well, you didn't say we, you said, are you really listening? Okay, there is a we here that isn't being included. If we start to change our language, I think there's something around I didn't know can be changed into did you know? Mm-hmm. Were you aware? Are we, are we all in the same place? Well, no, we're not, because sadly, media, mainstream media, podcast media has picked up on the grandiosity of terror and fear, and that's what sells. And so what happens is when there is a case, and this is why I think the contact, the offences that most people are frightened of are the ones that are being talked about by the media in the most scary way. For example, in the UK at the minute, there's a lot around certain types of sexual abuse cases taking place. And what we do is we go, whew, well, that's not how my life, and we separate and we othering, it's called. When we other, we don't then include ourselves. And what we need to have is inclusive language. It's almost like stop with the grandiosity, which I know I have worked in this space for a long time, and I certainly know that Christy will know this as well. The people who work in this space are fed up of seeing this repeatedly happening. And for 25, 30 years of the internet, this has been repeatedly happening. It is increasing. And we need to help parents by saying, did you know that this can happen if? And then you go through exactly what Christy was doing with her child. What would you do if? How could you protect your child if? And we don't. We terrify parents. We scare parents. We tell them that they're irresponsible. They're crap compared to other people, And this is what's happened is this whole dialogue has become privileged. It's become classist. It's become certainly about the kind of parenting that we consider is appropriate versus the kinds of styles that exist all the way around the world. And if we took an approach that's called allo-parenting, which is it takes a village to raise a child, we are the village and we are a global village now. And we have to understand not everybody has good intentions for children.
Yeah.
And that is easier to listen to than there are some really scary people who are going to do this, and this.
Yeah.
And we'll credit you, Kath, when we rebrand to.
I know, I was just thinking.
We'll give you a part of the
But that is what we talk about all the time, because it is that it's just like we're all struggling. We all need. Oh God!
I'll give you a better branding, and you can cite Daniel Siegel. He talks about there's a me, and he talks about a mwe. And when we have a mwe, which is the middle, so in psychotherapy, we talk about the middle between the client and the practitioner. The middle is where we work together. And we have to accept there is a me, and I have my values and my upbringing and my history and my culture and my religion, and I parent in this way. It doesn't make it any less wrong than a person who is so that there's a way in research that we tend to talk about the weird population, which is kind of like the Western industrialized, educated, and then you've got the R and the D and and I can't remember what they are right now as I'm having a brain fart. But there is something around actually collectivistic cultures work together. Individualistic cultures is where the troubles are at the moment, and we need a collectivistic global approach, and that is the biggest we that we can have.
And just
And
as much
we-
as that, yeah. Just
Yeah.
as much as that journey home from school, if you have a village who is supportive, you help one another. And if you can't pick your kid up, someone else will be there. And the place they go afterwards, you all support one another. All interconnects.
Yeah, and of course the reason we're individualistic is going to be blamed on the iPhone. So we can go round and round in circles on this.
I just have a lot of hope for the kids. I see, well, I don't know if it's just me but our kids are having some really interesting, really deep conversations in their own groups and in their own spaces. And I just think that, we have, there's still that segregation, there's still that us and them parts to the communities. But some of the kids that I'm seeing, and my daughter's generation and below, they're having such amazing conversations, and they're so much more intelligent, like emotionally intelligent. They're in touch. I know that we can sit here and think that it's all screwed and everything's bad and rah, rah, rah. But you mentioned, Kath, about the fact that there's certain people who think it doesn't happen. I can sit there categorically and say it happens in every community, every religion, every race, every culture, every place. There is no one who is not touched. We have research that shows that 1 in 4 adults in Australia have been sexually abused. There is research that shows that 1 in 4 children will be sexually abused. I think it's similar in most Western culture. So therefore, it is not going to be someone else's family. It is not going to be someone else's home. It is our homes, our families, our communities, and everyone have if you haven't had it, seen it, someone hasn't mentioned it to you, then you're not listening, or you're not spending time having the conversations that matter. So for me, I'm just like, you can't say it's not my family, not my kids, because if you it's going to be, that's when it will happen to you, because you've gone and put up that you put up this wall saying that it's not our family. And I just think that's where we need to be reminded that it can happen to anyone, anywhere.
And you're talking
both
about
online and in person.
And you're talking about 1 in 4, and it happened to me as a child, right? So just as an example, it's okay to talk about it, and then, talk to my daughter about it, talk to my sons about it, and say, look, this did happen, okay? And this does happen, and absolutely.
Yeah.
On that note, let's turn to the tween question today, which is, my friend told me something scary that happened to them online. What do I do now? And I think that comes in quite nicely on that conversation. So maybe, Catherine, you'd like to start?
So this is a regular occurrence in the therapy office. Sometimes I don't always know if it's the friend or, whether it's the child telling me. And what I generally will say to the young person is, wow, firstly, you have been trusted by somebody else. And here's the thing. Thank you for telling me that your friend told you something. That means that we can now have a conversation and we can both help your friend. So there is something around, if this is, a question that pops up, perhaps, like on an agony aunt type site, I would be saying to that person, so you don't have to handle this all by yourself. Is there a grown-up or a trusted adult that you can go to that can help you help your friend? And your friend has trusted you, which means that you do not have to carry this all by yourself, because that's really important. Many children feel like they have to be a mini therapist. Well, and this comes up in therapy quite often, well, I have to go online tonight, Kath, because I'm talking to somebody on the other side of the world that said that they don't want to live anymore. So that's not your responsibility. So what we can do is we can have a look at what can they do, what can you do, who can we talk to, and you help that child get a system around them so that, I mean, it depends. My friend told me something scary that happened to them online. Is that a real world friend or is it an online friend? And again, both of those would require different action. But for the young person, you don't have to manage this all by yourself, and find another grown up that can help you help your friend.
And it's that it goes,
Perfect
I
answer.
love that response. It goes back to that collective support, and
Yeah.
we've got to extend out and ask for help.
Yeah.
Christy?
I couldn't add any better. Like, that's exactly. And I mean, the only thing I would add to that is that as a parent in these situations, because our kids they take on these therapy roles, they take on counseling with their friends, they take on so much that we sometimes don't give our kids credit for how much they carry. I would say to my child, and I have said to her, some things are adult problems and require adult help. And it's okay that you come to me and tell me that your friend is struggling, because that means we can now go and get help for your friend or help them seek help for themselves. So, it's just making it okay to, tell someone, because like Kath said, you don't have to carry it on your own, and it's not okay that you feel that you have to. So it's better if we get help, because then we don't have to carry that burden ourselves.
I think that's a really important point, Christy, isn't it? Because for them to know that they don't have to carry themselves, but then there's still that you touched on, Kath, that trust issue. But that it's actually like an adult needs to know, this is an adult, this is something that needs an adult's help. And it's actually just that simple language that you can't carry it by yourself, but also children shouldn't have to deal with this by themselves. Adults will be need to get involved.
Yeah, I'm going to add another one on there in terms of when my boys were growing up. These are conversations that we would have. So and so told me this today in school. What do you want me to do about it, and how do you think your friend would like me to help? Rather than, I'm going to go to the teachers, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. There is something around that trusted moment. Is this child is saying, my friends told me this really, this really scary thing, or this happened to them online, or what should I do? It then becomes, how would you like me to help you help your friend? But let's go and, again, it depends on the circumstances, because the word scary could mean violent material. It could be that they were frightened with a threat, it could be anything. So the exploration, as a therapist, I'm always intrigued by language. Like, what do you mean by scary? What was it that happened? Have they been threatened, or have they seen something they didn't like? What is the help they actually need?
Yeah.
And then kind of taking it from there. Oh, well, they said they saw, I don't know, let's just going back to the example that Christy gave earlier. Oh, they said they saw porn. Okay. So maybe they don't want their mum and dad to know, and they've told you. And quite often it's, because they know who you are, Kath, and, they apparently, I have a reputation.
Yeah, I love that. Not going alone anyway. A heartfelt thank you today to Catherine and Christy. Safeguarding's not easy work, and it's some of the most important work there is nonetheless. And these two have made it their mission, and we really have enormous respect for both of you. What today's conversation has made clear is the subject of safeguarding belongs to all of us, in the everyday moments, in the conversations we choose to have, in listening to one another. If anything in this episode brought something up for you, or if you have concerns about a child in your life, online or offline, please reach out. Findahelpline.com can connect you with support wherever you are in the world. You do not have to carry it alone. And if this conversation mattered to you, please pass it on to a parent, a teacher, a neighbour, anyone. We're Penny and Jenny, and this has been Perspectives from the Informed Perspective. Keep noticing, keep listening, stay curious about the world around you. And until the next time, keep informing those perspectives.